To the teachers, assistants, and support staff who see potential in every child, Grand Canyon University recognizes you. We created the National Center for Teacher Preparation at GCU, along with a generous scholarship, so you can become a licensed teacher with paid benefits. Over 100 GCU alumni have been recognized award recipients, including Superintendent, Administrator, and Teacher of the Year. Find your purpose at Grand Canyon University. Private, Christian, affordable. Visit gcu.edu/parapro.
We're excited to announce that our very own podcasting platform, Zencastr, has become a new sponsor to the show. Check out the podcast discount link in our show notes and stay tuned for why we love using Zen for the podcast.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This is the CRM Archaeology Podcast. It's the show where we pull back the veil of cultural resources management archaeology and discuss the issues that everyone is concerned about. Welcome to the podcast. Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 176 for November 6th, 2019. On today's show, Doug and Bill talk about Bill's time at ACRA 2019, field schools, and more. So check your conference budget for 2019 and 2020 because the CRM Archaeology Podcast starts right now.
Hi, everyone. This is Doug. I will be the host for this week for the CRM podcast. With me, I have Bill Bill, you're in California today, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm in California and we have electricity today.
Well, it's a lucky day. So on today's podcast, we're going to be discussing a bit about Bill's experience at the ACRA conference. And also, we're going to get a little meta with some discussions about podcasting and archaeology. So let's kick it off with you, Bill. And can you tell us a little bit about ACRA and the ACRA conference and your general experience last week?
This is the first time I've ever been to the American Cultural Resources Association conference. It's a little bit different than the other archaeology conferences I've ever been to. There's not really multiple sessions or multiple rooms for you to go see many different things. It's more like one big ballroom and everyone just sits there and watches the one session for an hour or an hour and a half. So in that case, you have complete, focus. Each session is getting all the attention of all the folks that are there. And then the other thing that's different is most of the people who are at the American Cultural Resources Association conference are company owners or principal investigators. So really it's kind of a meeting of the folks who are, really at the higher management levels of cultural resources. So, depending on where you're at in the spectrum of CRM, that can be either comfortable or off-putting. So it can be uncomfortable if you're a student or if you're, a field tech or something like that, and you show up to an organization like this because that's all the bosses, right? But if you actually are, one of the company owners, it's time for you, or it's one of the spaces where you can rub elbows together and meet other people who are at the higher levels and kind of talk about some of these bigger things that are affecting the industry. And there, you can kind of see that in the kind of sessions that they have there. So one of the things that I missed the entire first day of the conference because it was $400 to go for 2 days of the conference. I guess there was a welcome reception, but most of the time, most of us are arriving on the first day of the conference. So really, it's $200 a day. And then if you are actually giving a presentation, then that day is free for you, right? So I paid for a day of the conference, but then got a free day. So I guess I got a $200 value, which is I guess what you would expect for a normal cultural resources conference. However, I missed the entire first day because I was traveling. But if you look at the sessions, if you ever go on the 2020 conference website, you'll see that the sessions talk about stuff like business branding and graphic design, data mining, tribal views on the adequacy of cultural and CRM. So you'll see that many of the sessions are talking about some of these bigger things that are kind of across multiple companies. It's not really, focused on one region or focused on one area. It's kind of some of the stuff that the entire industry would be focusing on.
And that's because ACRA is the sort of trade organization for CRM is it just the United States or is it Canada too? Is it all of North America?
Well, all the people that I saw there were all from North America. Because it was in Spokane this last time, I can imagine there was folks They were from Canada. I don't know. I guess it's easier to get there than, say Florida. Maybe it's not. All the discussion was really on the Historic Preservation Act and National Environmental Policy Act, and then, the way companies are working. So I guess it is really just the United States. However, Canadians, if you're listening, if you're out there, tell us that you come by. I only talk to folks who are from the United States.
Cool. So what was sort of the sessions and stuff that you ended up attending? I know you were going there to be on was it a panel or a workshop? What was it that you went for?
Sure. I was on 2 of the panels. So one of them, they were both on Saturday afternoon. One of them was called the CRM Curriculum Gap. The organizer for that one was my good friend Kate Chantry. We used to do CRM together in Seattle, and now she's a PhD student at Washington State. And I know her own motivation behind this was the fact that she is in a PhD program, but she's done CRM for, 17 years, I believe, or something like that, close to 20 years. And so she definitely has the perspective of an individual who has done a lot of projects and, has done a lot of archaeology. And, if you've ever been in a grad program, you can relate to the fact that many times the stuff that you're doing in class, you can visibly see is not necessary, but it's part of the whole process of getting the PhD. And so one of the things that she actually wanted to do was to motivate folks from Washington State, Gonzaga, Eastern Washington, the University of Idaho, students who are actually in these grad programs to drive to Spokane and show up and actually learn about, cultural resources. So I know that one of the things that she wanted to know is, how can we bridge this space between what's learned in CRM and what's learned in the university. And then I ended up being on another panel because I guess I just don't know how to say no. That was organized by another friend of mine, Katrina Eichner, who is now a professor at the University of Idaho. And Idaho actually, I feel like, does a pretty good job of giving folks CRM experience and, giving them a kind of an introduction to the entire industry. And the University of Idaho, I went there. Their students do a great job of going on into the industry. Most of the people who graduate with a master's from the University of Idaho go on to do CRM. So it's really in the best interest of the professors there and the entire department to kind of aim towards that. And so I can fully see why the University of Idaho would be part of this entire thing too. But the second session was called Bridging the Divide. So they're supposed to talk about what you learn in college and then what you end up learning on the job and what universities can do to kind of connect that and what companies can kind of do to bridge that. And then the second part was just purely on what can we do to bridge the gap, right? So kind of they fed into each other. And actually they did have a great segue after, an hour of one, it automatically just led into the next session.
And what were sort of the things that were discussed during these sessions?
Well, so we were given a series of questions. And the first one talking about the curriculum gap, the questions that I have here so the other folks who joined me, it was myself and another professor at Washington State, and then 2 CRM company owners. So it was 2 people who have actually owned company. They do the hiring. They've been around for a long time. And then 2 people who are professors that end up doing the training for the students. So the questions that I was given, for the other professor, who also I believe has done CRM too, we were asked, can we talk about what CRM classes our institutions offer? Do we think a specialized MA in CRM is a good idea? Are there opportunities for our programs to partner with CRM companies? And then if our company has an actual consulting branch. So those are the things that the professors were supposed to talk about. Yeah.
Did they end up talking about any of that? I'd be interested to hear what they said.
Yeah, no, we followed the script. It was great. It was great because we were given the questions and then I had like a month to think about this stuff. So I had these questions that I knew was going to be asked for me. And I had this whole written out idea of what I was going to talk about. But before I went, I actually ran it past my students. So I have an undergrad class with about 35 students. And I'd say probably 20 or 17 for sure, they want to go into archaeology. And then I had my graduate class is actually ethical issues in cultural resource management. So those are PhD students at Cal. We've been working on CRM for a month and a half. So I asked them also, what I should present when I got on my panel. And I did that. So I talked about the questions that I was asked that we had, focused on. But I also brought up the information that my students had gotten and put that in front of the entire room too.
What was the information that your students have got over the months and years of their careers, or I guess beginning career, their education?
Yeah, well,
Bill, laughing is probably not a good sign.
No, I mean, so you and I both know, like, how it goes as an undergrad, and that it depends on what professors you have and what institution you go to as to whether you're ever going to hear about CRM, right? So if you go to a place like the University of Idaho, where most of the people go on to do CRM, and your professors are getting CRM contracts and working with CRM companies, probably from, intro to archaeology, which is the truth, you're going to find out about CRM. If you go to a place like Berkeley, where your professors are top scholars that are literally creating anthropological theory and thinking of these ideas at a higher meta level, there's going to be less space for CRM because what they know and are actually leading the country in is thinking of these other ideas, right? So for the students, it really just depends on what class they take. If they take my class, they're going to learn about CRM probably on day one within the first 40 minutes, if it's an archaeology class. If you take some of the other professors, you may not learn about CRM, or you may learn about it, obliquely. So at a place like Cal, I'm the black sheep that stands out from the crowd, and we do the other theoretical stuff, but I always try to apply it to real world concepts, that include things like money, budgets, ethics, working with communities, right? Like all that kind of stuff. I can't speak for my other professors. They do an excellent job at their own stuff. However, I don't know how many of them are talking about CRM. So going back to the thing of, what classes I teach a graduate level CRM class that's based on a great class that I took as a PhD student, but it's also based on all the stuff that I either learned in CRM that came the hard way, or things that I always wanted to learn in CRM that I spent a bunch of time learning. Either, it wasn't my job, like contracting and taxes and other stuff, or it became my job and I wanted to be ready, to have that knowledge, right? So I ended up learning it independently, even though I never practiced it in CRM, which is good because then I became a PhD and have to manage these grants and stuff. It was easier for me to not get audited by the federal government because I actually was paying taxes on it. And I understood about paying individuals livable wages to do tasks rather than just trying to learn every single thing on my own. So at Cal, there is at least one class you learn about CRM. But then the other thing is Cal's, the archaeology folks, a lot of our students do work for CRM companies. And so CRM companies come and give talks at the university. So there is actually a connection. It's not 100%. And that's why after this, I would like to build those connections with other local Bay Area companies.
One of the questions that you'd shared with me is one about asking, I'm assuming this is a panelist. Each one was asked, what was their best training experience or, most valuable job training they ever received. What were some of the answers to that?
Oh, man, it was all over the place. Almost all of us cited field school as the real, like fulcrum, really. That was the point where those classes and all that stuff that we had read about archaeology kind of came together, because then we were actually doing it, right? So the other thing about the folks that are on the panel, they're all people who went on to go do archaeology as a job and to try and make that their actual career. And the field experience, I mean, we've talked about field school several times, but it's difficult to understate how important the field experience is to an archaeologist's career, especially when they're going into CRM, because almost all the people who are supervisors all did a field school. Almost all the people who are, the managers, mid-level managers, they did a field school. Almost all the professors that you ever learn from did a field school. So it's burned in everyone's mind that this is the way of training. But one of the things that I would like to actually pivot from, in the future is this idea that field school, actually going out for 6 solid weeks, into the desert and digging on some site, maybe there's some other alternatives. Like maybe we can actually design other kinds of field experience that doesn't involve someone leaving their entire job or, having to sublet their apartment for 6 weeks or like just basically live on credit card. I mean, my field school, when I was a undergrad, I used credit cards to pay for my summer and had to move out of my apartment and move back home with my parents afterwards just to afford 6 weeks in rural Oklahoma. And that's something that not everybody can do. But, that one experience, right? Like we all recognize that as an important formative experience in archaeologist's life. And then everybody passes that on down the line. However, I feel like in 2019, maybe we might want to try to think about something different. Maybe there will be a different way than just always going out into the forest or the desert or to Greece to excavate.
I actually, I know everyone talked about field schools and stuff, but this actually kind of segues nicely into another question they'd asked, which is, I guess it was the people who employed CRM archaeologists on the panel. What do they look for in a resume? Was field schools one of those? And what is the sort of thing they look for on a resume? I'm assuming it was like for new students, but maybe the discussion went a little more broad. What was that discussion?
So interestingly, field school wasn't always the 100% one. So it was crazy because all these people who own companies and are professors all said field school was the formative thing for their experience. And that's when they knew they really wanted to do this and they were just going to go all for it. Then they say, no, I don't always look for a field school when I hire my people. So like entry-level folks, one of the things that they were looking for is who do you know and what have you ever done, right? So a lot of folks who did, architecture history projects or doing artifact analysis in the lab, those were things that they could say, okay, well, you've done something real, right? So even though we all hyper value, I guess, the field experience, having some kind of experience at all was what they were looking for, right? So how has this person ever done anything? And then many said that they weren't really interested in vetting someone until they had actually worked for another company, right? So even adding to the, double-edged sword aspect of this, the whole, if I don't have any experience, how do I get experience? But I have to have experience to get experience. I mean, this is the circular system we're all stuck in for most of our careers. The hiring folks said that it wasn't always field experience, or it wasn't always a field school, but they had to have done something for someone else, meaning that some other company hired them untested, and then they knew that person, and then that was how, because they called that reference and said, how did he work out in the field? Oh, it was great. Okay. And so then they hired them through that, right? So it wasn't even field school. It was like, no, I don't really value field school that much. You have to have already done CRM.
Damn, that's brutal.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That is absolute. Did the discussion go into anything about like you have to start out somewhere and like they should take a chance on people who obviously at some point need to get that first chance? Like, was there any discussion about that?
Yeah. So then the bridging the divide thing, the thing that I didn't actually get. So the other thing that I tried to be polite and make sure that every 5 panelists, we all have time to talk. We had 1 hour, and I already just read you off the 5 to 6 questions I had to, we were supposed to go over. We didn't get through all these questions in 1 hour. So I didn't actually say the key is having some kind of experience, but having the university and the companies work together to provide those opportunities, right? So right now, the way that it is, we're depending on CRM, or we're depending on universities to provide archaeological field schools. And then, either they're, vetted through the Register of Professional Archaeologists, or they're through the International Field Research, IFR field schools, or something like that. We're just depending on who's the administrator of that field school and what the curriculum is to train folks some stuff, right? So, for 50 years, CRM companies have been sitting back saying, well, students aren't learning this stuff, and how come they don't learn this? Why aren't they getting it taught in the university? We'll get back to why they're not actually learning this. But they're also disproportionately relying on the university to provide the field school or the lab work experience, and then saying, oh, yeah, that's adequate. Okay, so they've done this much artifacts. I'll hire her or I'll hire them to come and work on, right? So once again, it's like, well, the university is the educational institution. They're supposed to provide every single opportunity. And then we'll sit back and vet like, okay, well, that person can come or they can't, or, and just we'll pick and choose whoever they produce. But one of the things that the panel and we propose to the companies is have an actual internship that you're going to have every single year so that we can funnel students in. So we can create the, lab experience or the field, whatever limited field experience we can have. If we know that you're going to have an internship that's going to hire one person and it's going to be in this place and it's, paid, unpaid, whatever, and that you have a flexible schedule, because the other thing about CRM is the project happens when it happens and it can't worry about the academic system and all that stuff, right? So this means the companies have to go out on their own to have data or to have filing or to have artifacts or something available for a student so that they can actually manage those kind of things. And many companies do have old data and other things that they wish they could go further and do other synthesis. Well, this is like perfect for an undergrad or a graduate student to do the internship. And that's like just the unpaid type of thing. Because in an ideal world, we'd have actually paid positions, right? They would work back at the lab. They would make a certain amount of money. Of course, they don't have a field school and all this experience, but then they would be vetting the student and also providing real world experience so that the university doesn't have to teach everything and follow all the rules and then still provide the experience, right? So you're basically working for a CRM company and you're getting experience, and the CRM company is actually, it's a probationary period kind of for the student. And when they finish their degree, then they know this person's legit and ready to be hired. And they've also spent the time training that individual on specific things. So the companies, many of them were like, oh, well, we've had internships. The professors were saying, then you got to make sure that it's available every February so that we can have people apply so that they know in June or whatever they're doing this with your company. Like, get organized so that we can advertise it. You can't just post it up 2 weeks in advance when everybody's already left campus and then say, oh, we couldn't find an intern. Like, you got to say in advance so that we can actually choose students through our classes and other things to help them come and work for you.
So I have a lot of questions, but we're at the end of the segment, so we'll go to break real quick, and then when we come back on the other side, Bill, I'll have a lot to ask you.
Chris Webster here for the Archaeology Podcast Network. We strive for high-quality interviews and content so you can find information on any topic in archaeology from around the world. One way we do that is by recording interviews with our hosts and guests located in many parts of the world all at once. We do that through the use of Zencastr. That's Zencastr. Zencastr allows us to record high-quality audio with no stress on the guest. Just send them a link to click on, and that's it. Zencastr does the rest. They even do automatic transcriptions. Check out the link in the show notes for 30% off your first 3 months, or go to zencastr.com and use the code CRMARC.
Well, we got a minute. I'm going to buy that truck I've been wanting.
Wait, don't you need like weeks to shop for a car?
I don't. Carvana makes it super convenient to find exactly what I want.
Hold up. You're buying a car on your phone? Isn't that more of a laptop thing?
You can shop wherever you want.
I like to do my research, read reviews, compare models. Plus, Carvana has thousands of options. How'd you decide on that truck?
Because I like it.
Oh, that is a great reason.
Go to Carvana.com to sell your car the convenient way.
All right, welcome back from the break. So Bill was just discussing this idea for sort of bridging internships between university and going into the world of CRM. So what was the sort of response that you got back from this suggestion, and what was the general discussion around this?
All right. So in the room of folks who were there, I can't really remember directly the response was kind of, we have those internships. And then another professor who was on the panel, Mark Warner, was saying, well, you've got to tell us, like, you need to decide in November that you're going to have an internship offered in February so that we can advertise it, so that by May, when students are done, not only have you interviewed folks and then they know that they're going to be working on this stuff, right? Like the lead-in time has to be much further in advance. And I know CRM folks, so the response was, well, we've had those internships. Yeah, we love them. We do them. And he's kind of like, okay, well, then tell me more than 48 hours in advance. And then I can actually tell my students, right? So that was one response. And then kind of another response was like, maybe writing some notes down and kind of, intrigued by that idea. But then later on, as we all know, at the bar afterwards, that's where the real, stuff goes down, right? So I was talking to some folks that run companies in the Bay Area, and they have come to Cal. They've given talks about CRM. Their company hires people from the University of California, and they have several people on staff, right? And I was telling them that, this idea of internship is not necessarily, the same way as it is working for Microsoft, where thousands of people apply, and then, they sift through these many applications, and then all this hogwash goes down, and someone ends up like serving coffee for the whole summer so that they can hopefully get a connection. I was saying, this is a chance that you kind of selectively choose individuals you're going to hire before you hire them. And then you also teach them all the skills that you want them to have before you hire them. So we're calling it internship, but it's really probationary period of doing work that you need to have done or that you would like to have done as kind of a trial basis. If that involves, kind of a job shadow, digging shovel probes or something, or doing a survey, then that could be something, right? If it involves doing like photogrammetry or 3D imaging of artifacts, that could also be a thing. If it's, creating an access database of all these different reports and updating your company library, those are all different things. And so that it can come in many different forms. And I was also saying they should really start thinking about these kind of digital internships where, the student is kind of just 5 to 8 hours a week, independent study, working on stuff for the CRM company. Someone is, has a pet project, has some kind of analysis they'd like to have done. They're helping, take some extra time, train the individual a little bit, but then checking in on them periodically, through Skype or through the phone to make sure that work's getting done, to make sure they're not, stuck on something. And then at the end of the semester, the professor who's working, they write a short paper and they get independent study credits, right? Or they actually go to your office and work there in the office, just like a normal employee, and then they get paid a nominal fee as an actual employee. I mean, it doesn't have to always be that. Of course, working for the company and putting that on your resume is way better. Getting paid is way better than, getting nothing. But second best is still getting, college credit for this extra work that you're doing for a CRM company. And then people who are most interested are going to rise to the top. The people who do the best, they're going to be the ones that you would like to have come work as a field tech or come, work later on at the company. And then the folks who don't quite work out or don't get the stuff done, then obviously that's not the kind of person that you actually want to have working at your company. And so I was telling them that rather than, having some kind of formal advertising in this and then go through, just have a relationship with professors and talk with them about what students are most interested, who's skilled, who do they think would do well at, paleobotany or mapping or something else. And then try to put these extra projects that you'd love to have in the report, but you'd like, you don't have time to pay someone at a PhD GIS analyst level to do this. See if the student can actually do this kind of thing that maybe, it can go a long way and then has to just be fixed up, or, the student can fully do it. I mean, people who are motivated to do archaeology can do great work at any age. So being given a chance, like that's the key. And rather than thinking about it being a formalized thing, maybe just have this be a constant relationship with the university rather than, having to be a summer internship. And so they were really intrigued with that, and they kind of understood it. And the reason why I know it's a pretty good idea is because, companies do that at the University of Arizona all the time. And they do it at Pima Community College. Like they're the ones who set up the curriculum for the field schools. They're the ones who are telling the students what they need to learn. And then from that, the CRM PIs and crew chiefs are kind of just choosing people, pre-selecting them right from the project into the company.
So how did the rest of the session go down beyond just the internship stuff and bridging? Were there other ideas about what people could do, or was that the main discussion was about the internships?
Well, no, that wasn't the main discussion. There was a lot of talk about, what they're looking for on resumes. And, we really got away from the fact that universities aren't really doing the CRM in-house anymore, which, better or for worse, that was how many of these people who started companies, they came up in the 70s when universities had these CRM departments. And then, it's a combination of things that happen. Almost every single university CRM outfit is gone now, because half the time the university just saw it as a, cash cow and just started to scrape more and more and more until it got to the point where, the CRM thing wasn't really viable. But probably the biggest thing that hurt the university CRM companies is the fact that we're ruled by the academic calendar. So we don't have all day and all night to just do CRM like a company. Students have to finish their exams and they have to study. Professors have to do other stuff because their real job is working at the university. And I mean, that's seriously what prevents many universities from actually doing more in-house CRM, which I feel like would have been that would have been the ideal situation for students to learn, because they're getting credit, they're getting paid, they're learning on the job. Everybody's learning all along about the actual industry, but that's not something that actually exists anymore. So we have to rely on this new thing, which is collaboration between companies and universities.
And Bill, you'd mentioned that you had went and asked, your PhD students and your undergraduates and everyone what they'd sort of thought or what they would like to know and stuff. Can you share a bit of that with our viewers?
Yeah,
our listeners, I guess. Not viewers. We're not on TV,
viewers,
but our listeners.
We're the only ones staring at the screen.
Yeah.
They better keep their eyes on the road and just listen. All right. So yeah, like I said, I spent quite a while mulling these questions over in my own mind. And then I realized, what? Whatever I say is one thing, but I'm not a student anymore. So it's really the students. It'd be interesting to see what they have to say. So I did. I asked my undergrad class and my graduate class, which this semester, interestingly, is CRM. My graduate class is Ethical Issues in Cultural Resource Management. So the students who were in that, they signed up to be in a CRM class. And this is what we talk about for 3 hours every single week. So the graduate students were most interested in, so they kind of universally were frustrated at the fact that they felt like you have to have a graduate degree to survive in cultural resources. The glass ceiling that exists in CRM is widely known that if you don't have a graduate degree, you don't fulfill the Secretary of Interior standards for archaeology, which makes it harder for you to be permitted to supervise archaeologists on federal and in most, federal and state land, really. You need to fit the Secretary of Interior standards to be a supervisor, and that requires a graduate degree. So they all were remiss about the fact that folks had to go to graduate school to do CRM, which, that's too bad. But the reality is the government has set up this arbitrary standard. And I have a feeling the standard was set up to prevent people from just taking backhoes and just doing whatever the hell they feel like with no kind of concern for the science of archaeology. Or maybe it was the archaeologists that created it. I don't know. I don't know where those standards came from.
I remember Tom King talked about it. It was the idea of trying to make sure not just anyone could go out with like a backhoe, call themselves an archaeologist, and be able to get contracts and stuff. I believe it had to come down to, it was something easily defendable as a requirement, in that by then there was all the system of accreditation of universities. So you could easily just point to that and say, yes, these are accredited degrees. And, a degree is a fairly arbitrary but easy to measure results, as opposed to saying like you need to be a good archaeologist, which would probably have ended up with court cases about people arguing over what was a good archaeologist. So yeah, I believe it was easiest thing to do at the time, though quite a few people I think now regret it being put in as you need to have a master's degree. But yeah, that's my understanding of why that happened. Sorry, Bill, I've gotten off track on that.
No,
but you were saying, your students?
It helps keep us on track because they're very concerned about the requirement to have a master's because of the cost and time and the fact that so many Americans lack access to continuing education resources, right? So, that this goes to the heart of the, diversifying archaeology conundrum, right? If we're going to diversify archaeology, both ethnically and socioeconomically, then we're going to need to include a wider cross-section of the United States, right? But in order to do that, we're going to have to be, working with the individuals who have the skills to get a master's degree, which is not all Americans, right? I mean, we don't even live in a country where half of all the adults have a college degree, and then we're going to winnow it down even smaller to just folks who have a master's or a PhD. I mean, that right there is one of the most difficult obstacles to diversifying archaeology. But then in that, the students are also asking, they're very concerned about the fact that we don't really tell students what to expect from a PhD in anthropology or a master's, right? So demystifying academia is another thing that they were very interested in. So it's a full awareness that getting a graduate degree is not easy and not all Americans are going to be able to do it. But then those who actually get in, doesn't matter what status you're at, unless your parents were professors or something like that, demystifying what to expect from a PhD or a master's program is another thing, because, you know, these are folks that are actually living in the heat, the boiler room. They're studying hard, but they're also living in the Bay Area where it's not easy to live and things are expensive. And, you know, the rules on what you can do are capricious, and it's difficult to know if you're doing the right thing. And, you know, sorry, me, myself, and many of us other advisors, we're not necessarily so hot at giving people advice, because each person's advice has to be tailored to that individual. And we don't always actually have intimate understanding of all our students, right? So it's like there's a combination of things. So letting folks know what they can expect in the master's and versus a PhD, or in both programs, right? They feel like would actually help make the process more accessible to folks, right? So people who have gotten in, we've all seen folks who just went on to a graduate degree in archaeology because they didn't know what else to do. And then they get in there and they're kind of like, wow, this sucks and I didn't really want to do this. And now they're stuck in a master's program, right? Same thing happens in a PhD too. I think that some of those people who, if they had been told in advance the truth rather than recruited, they might have made a different choice. Well, and also people who made different choices and went on to these other fields realized that maybe they should have just done archaeology anyway, because the whatever field they followed is actually not going to help them get forward, right? So they felt like early intervention, both undergrads and graduates, said that learning about archaeology at an earlier age was absolutely critical, that CRM companies and universities need to reach out to middle schools and high schools and spread information about archaeology, because there is a huge, population of Americans who have no idea what CRM is. They have no idea what archaeology is. They're watching Ancient Aliens and learning about these weird, pyramids and pseudoscience, and they have no idea what actual archaeology is. And I actually agree. Going out, telling people, what archaeology is all about, reaching out to elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, I feel like that, and especially at the high school level, preparing students for what college is going to be about, the reality of college, not what your mom says, not what, the recruiter says, not what your test scores, like talking to them for real about our own experiences and being sincere about what college was for us. I think that a lot of that stuff, students don't really know, and they sign up, they get in, and they're like, holy shit, what am I going to do now? And they're in this thing, and they're taking out loans, and they're multiple years in, and what are we going to do? How are they going to make it? So I feel like that kind of ambiguity, clearing up as much of that soon as possible, is probably one of the best things. And then the students were also asking if we ever listened to field techs. So, in addition to reaching out to students and all this other stuff, they were asking, do companies ever listen to their field techs? And it's a mixed bag in my experience. I've worked for companies where the people who are in charge did ever get out of their office and they did talk to field techs, not just about what the project is, not just hanging out to have beers or whatever. We're talking like kind of career counseling, guiding, what do you want to do? What do you see are the problems with this company? What would you like to learn more? Just kind of actually talking to folks without drinking, without like focusing purely on the job, just, listening to field techs. What do young people want that are working in CRM? I don't know. And I told them that the internet is full of information. So the field techs and the crew chiefs are all listening to the podcast. They are all on Facebook groups. They are all saying which companies are good, which are bad in whatever kind of way, probably thousands of different ways. They're talking about workplace conditions, whether they should unionize, whether they need to join groups. They also are giving each other tax advice on, harassment. All this stuff's going on. And I don't really know if company owners are part of these field tech groups or are, always listening. So I think that maybe, if companies, because I also heard at the conference, if there's any architectural historians, if there's anybody listening to this that's doing architectural history Evidently, companies coast to coast need architectural historians. They can't hire enough. If anybody's listening that's, thinking about being a field tech, many companies are talking about how they're having a person power drain, that they just can't even find humans that want to do the job. Now, I don't know if that's because they're not paying enough money, or if that's because they're just not enough skilled people are finishing college that could even do CRM. I don't know. But this is a good time for folks to be finishing college, grad school, PhD, any kind of college that's going into archaeology, because I just heard from the people who hire folks, they're looking to hire skilled people. They're looking for people who actually know how to do archaeology, and they're interested. Like, a lot of times they want you to already be pre-trained, as we already talked about. They're just looking for, bright, with it, intelligent people who really want to do archaeology so that they can train them up, because they just can't even find people in the United States to do the job. But then the question is, if they get those folks, are they going to listen to them?
When you're talking to them about this, how did you get the feeling for people's expectations, so company owners, for who they're looking for? Because I noticed there was a trend. Basically, during this last recession, everyone who was a crew, like you had entire crews made of like former crew chiefs and project officers and project managers, because there was no job. So basically, you had people doing tech jobs that were 10, 15 years worth of experience. And then now there's a bit of a shortage. Have they readjusted their expectations that if they're going to get people, they might be getting people who actually don't have that much experience, and not every member of a crew is going to have 10 years of experience and have actually managed projects before?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not really sure, because I know what you're talking about. And during the recession, it was like, well, whose turn is it to be crew chief today? All right, well, I'll be tech and you be crew chief, and who wants to run the project? And we would just talk, because you're right. Everybody had a decade's worth of experience and a graduate degree, and it was a different time. I don't know. I don't know if they're changing expectations, because kind of what I heard was like, students need to know how to write, and they need to know GIS, and they need to know photogrammetry, and they need to know coding, and they need to know how to use a tablet, and they need to know this, and they also need to be personable and this and that and this, right? And it was like, so which one of those things did you want university to teach? How to brush your teeth, because that's something that you should already know. How to be on time, how to not be a jerk. Like, those were all things that you should already know as an adult. So where does the university training come in? And then also, do you, like, how do you think you're going to ever have this Delta Force super skilled person that finishes with their BA? There's going to be like 50 of those people a year, and either their parents are archaeologists, or they had the money to just do archaeology from the time they were 12 all the way on up. Like, that's the only way you're going to get that person. All the rest of us got a general bachelor's degree, which means we spent 2 years on ephemeral, weird stuff like English 101 that didn't help us one bit. And then 2 years, sorry for all the English 101 teachers out there.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Bill, being able to write, I'd say is a critical part of archaeology.
You're right.
Maybe pick a different class.
I was going to say,
different class.
Did you learn how to write in English 101, or did you learn how to read stories and then write a couple gibberishes, 700 words about how you feel? Because whatever you do in English 101, your boss will shred in CRM, right?
Fair enough.
Whatever. I'm going to get away from that whole topic, right? Because there's an English professor out there right now that just spit their coffee out and is angeredly typing a response to our podcast.
Fair enough.
All right. I'm getting away from the English. It's valuable, right? But at the end of the day, it was kind of like, the university system's designed for customers to be locked in for 4+ years, not for you to actually just get in and out in a year and get this specialized degree, right? Technical schools for that. The universities I went to were for drawing it out over 4 years of intro to theater and English 101 and, personal communications and all these other classes that I took that didn't really have anything to do with archaeology. That's ultimately what I wanted to do, right? So we were, we only have, even at the master's level, it's even worse, because we have 4 semesters to create this superhero that the university or that the companies are asking for. And it was kind of like, well, at the end of the day, you're not going to get that person, just like you were saying, Doug. You're going to have to actually train some of this stuff on your own. And that's where really the partnership and the internship idea could really go a long ways. But, it's also all for naught if the people at the top are just kind of like, back in my day, we used to dig 2 million shovel probes with, our hands with a bottle of whiskey in one hand and a cigar in her mouth. And it's like, yeah, well, this is 2019. Like, I can't really smoke a cigar while I have my PPE on at this hazmat site. Like, it's difficult to drink this whiskey while we drive the company truck. And that's kind of like many of these folks. You've been there, man. You've been there. Well, back in my day, I never wore a shirt in the desert. And it's kind of like, dude, that's inappropriate now. We can't do that. So are they listening to the techs? Are they listening to, the hardship of the folks who are out there doing the stuff?
So we have to go to a break, but yeah, I think we'll have a good discussion on the other side. So
I'll put my shirt on too.
All right. Yeah. Let's head to break, and we'll be back shortly.
You may have heard my pitch for membership. It's a great idea and really helps out. However, you can also support us by picking up a fun t-shirt, sticker, or something from a large selection of items from our TeePublic store. Head over to arcpodnet.com/shop for a link. That's arcpodnet.com/shop to pick up some fun swag and support the show.
So we're back, and I'll jump into some questions there, Bill. You sort of were discussing, are people listening to field techs and stuff like that? But are the owners in general, are they listening to people? Where are they getting their information from? I mean, what was your general feeling from the conference of, are they aware of these issues? Are they talking with students? Are they talking with field techs? Are they just sort of talking among themselves? Where was the communication going with this?
Yeah, one of the things I did notice after knowing several people who own companies and started companies, it seems like the next round of folks who started our 2000s, 2010 companies have finally found people. Their company has grown big enough that it can kind of sustain itself. They have principal investigators that are skilled enough, that have worked long enough for them, that they can actually have the time to have weekends or whatever, or go to a conference in Spokane, right? So a lot of the folks that were there are from some of these larger companies that they already have folks that will keep the business running. But what I thought was great is a couple of people that I know that started their own company, 10 years ago. It's great to see them, smiling and not totally exhausted because they finally have folks who can run their companies, right? So like what I take from that is that there's folks who started their own company that are, you can do it basically. You can start your own company and you can survive. And I'm seeing some folks come out on the shining end of that. And I feel like the only way they really could, get to that point is to relinquish some of the control of being a company owner. So we used to have Sonia on here quite a bit. And one of the things that she really kind of impressed me is that every day from the time that you wake up to the time you go to sleep, the company owner is constantly thinking about how they can pay their employees, like all the time. That's the one thing that they're thinking about. So they don't have a bunch of time if they're running a small business to go to conferences, to talk to other CRM folks, or to sit down and have coffee with their field techs and stuff. I mean, they're constantly working 20-hour days. And so what I'm seeing now is folks who are quite successful, they've gotten to the point where they do have space to listen. The big corporations, I don't know if they really are listening because they're in a totally different space, because they're strained between shareholders or people in the other construction departments, or the architects who are always kind of asking, why the hell do we have archaeology? It's just money loss. So they're always trying to justify themselves that way. And then they have the extra pressure of constantly making money, right? So if you work for the huge companies, I can see how the bosses there are strained in another way. Not only are they working all day to try and keep their department open, but they also are trying to prove themselves through a million different systems. I don't know if those folks really are spending the time talking to the techs. But one thing I do know is that they read these blog posts that we put out there. And they are, even if they're not responding, they are actually listening to podcasts, because they would say that they've heard me on the podcast, and that when I would, say things that, that I recognize that name. Oh, I listened to your episode on this, great job. I heard what you said there. Right. So it's kind of like they're running companies. They're not active on social media, and they're not like showing themselves on LinkedIn, but they are in the background listening to the electronic media and stuff that we're creating. So, I guess, if there was a place for them to listen, this is kind of the one. If there was a place for field techs to talk about what's going on in the industry, coming on the podcast or being on a podcast, that's actually one way. Because then, it takes away the intimidation of talking to your boss. Folks can be anonymous or whatever, and they can talk on, podcasts or on the internet. Just hopefully they're not doing slander or anything that'll get us in trouble. But as far as sitting down and face-to-face, I'm not sure if they're actually talking to the people who are at the lowest levels in their companies.
Yeah, well, actually, sort of, you bring up a point that I just like, I don't know where the time's gone, but like Tristan was mentioning today, APN's been out for 5 years, the Archaeology Podcast Network, and God, we've been doing the CRM podcast for. God, we just had an anniversary episode, didn't we, a little while ago? Where are we at now? How many years has this been going?
It was like 7 years. My son's 9, and he was still in diapers when we started the podcast.
Jeez, time has really gone by.
Yeah, my son's in 4th grade. He grew out of his shoes. We had to go get shoes, and I'm like, man, this kid just keeps growing. Either his legs are growing or his feet are growing. This guy just keeps growing. So yeah, we've been on the podcast for years and years.
So these people who are mentioning the podcast and sort of listening to it and stuff, did anyone say like how they came across the podcast, and did they actually like, have we all been blacklisted from ever working in CRM ever again? Or
I think we might be ruined, or at least we're only allowed to work as long as we keep a gag in our mouth and like a bandana with a sock in our mouth. We're not allowed to talk. We can just work, but we can't talk anymore. No, people were talking about how they were listening to it on the way to Spokane, and folks I'd never even met, people I don't even know, they were talking about it. So I don't know how folks are finding out about it. The internet, it's a wonderful God that just, I guess, places opportunity before us.
Man, yeah, I'm trying to remember back, like in the beginning, I feel like I knew that podcasts existed like 10 years ago, but I think the first time I even actually really seriously thought about it was like when Chris sent me an email saying, hey, I have this kind of crazy idea. I listened to podcasts he did a lot of skeptics and science podcasts, I think years ago, just listening to him. And that was his thing. He's like, I want to do an archaeology one. And then you were on the first episode, weren't you, Bill? Was it me, you, Chris, Steven?
I think Steven, and also, oh man, I can't think of the guy's name. Diachronic Designs website.
Russell.
Yeah, Russell. That's right, Russell.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, and it was just weird talking into a microphone for 3 hours.
Yeah, because the very first couple of episodes, it was like hours. I remember Chris used to get so angry at us he still gets angry at us for going way over time. But those first couple were a bit intense.
Yeah, I'm glad he learned about editing after the first, 10 hours of recorded. I mean, the first 1.5 episodes. He started cutting some of it out.
Yeah. Man, well, if we were to like encourage, I don't know, some of these company owners and stuff to start their own podcasts, what would be like the advice, or like if there's other people out there who are thinking about it, and if it is having this impact that people are listening to us. I mean, that sounds. I'm gonna apologize to all our listeners right now, man. Like if you've been sticking around listening to me all this time. That's harsh. I give you props, but I'm sure there's other people who are definitely more articulate than I am, and probably have a lot better opinions. Yeah. What would we tell people if they wanted to start their own CRM podcast, or the podcast for project managers or something like that?
Yeah, I don't know, but I would say that our podcast started during the recession. The goal was to try and help people survive as a CRM archaeologist. So I still feel like that's the goal. Even though now we do way less CRM. I mean, I do almost none. At least Chris is still in on it, and Steven's still doing it. But I guess just figure out what you have to say. And is it the kind of thing that is something that would always remain on someone's mind across the years. Because, the CRM Archaeology podcast is about how people make money. And that's definitely one of the evergreen topics in the world. How are you going to pay for your food and your shelter and stuff? CRM folks, the people listening to this, either they want to do it or they're already doing it and want to do it better and keep doing it longer. But then to the company owners, they want to know more about, what's being said as far as their industry, right? So it is about folks and the way that they make a living in the world. I'm not sure how every podcast, the topic and, the longevity of it, but CRM Archaeology podcast is definitely something that can last for a long time because there's a committed group of individuals who really wants to do this. And even though people don't listen to every single episode or whatever, they care about this because they want to do archaeology and they also have to pay their bills. And CRM is really the main way they're doing that.
Or as we've discussed many a time, all the side hustles that eventually become people's full-time job.
Yeah, no joke.
Yeah, we've had quite a few speakers on who have either... Yeah, actually, I'd say like we've had at least half a dozen people who sort of like did CRM and then moved on to other sort of things, or were in the process of moving on to other sort of professions or projects or work or, whatever it was, moving on to the next stage because, it's a tough way to make a living.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and also, the other thing that cultural resources, that's just one job, and all of us are going to have many different careers in our lives. So it's probably excellent for us to help those who want to do CRM, and then when it's over, just don't feel bad about going on to something new. I mean, you did it. You did it for as long as it was worthwhile, and when it's run its course, some of us will do it our entire lives. Many will only just do it for 5-6 years or something like that. No harm in that. But I think it's, the role that all the APN podcasts play is kind of putting real information about archaeology out there for folks to learn about. So, there's so many different podcasts. I barely can even listen to all the ones that there are. But, there's this one I definitely listen to, not just to hear myself. I always listen to the ones where I'm not on, right? But this is kind of the way that people are learning about archaeology.
Yeah, I was about to say, I can't actually listen to any of the ones I am on. So, yeah, I definitely, I don't think I've ever listened to a single one I've been on, hitting the sound of my own voice. Because it doesn't sound, the voice on the recording is not the voice I hear in my head.
Yeah.
Which makes me sound a little touched there. But you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I do.
Yeah, you just don't sound like you think you sound. And I'm not a big fan of my voice. So, yeah, I don't think I've ever listened to an episode. Oh, no, that's not true. I remember I had to go back. So I didn't listen to the full episode. But it was a couple, like, I think I listened to the first episode where I was on maybe 6 months ago when that one guy sent in a comment complaining about my language.
Oh, yeah.
I had to go back. I was like, I don't remember it being that bad.
Man.
Yeah, that was like the first time I'd listened to myself on a podcast. Because, I do the video stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I've listened to myself before. And, yeah, oh, man, like, it's like stabbing myself in the head with like a dull spoon or something. It's horrendous, but yeah, we probably should not be saying this, and like definitely encouraging lots of people to start their own podcasts so we can hear more and diverse voices, and actually, just getting more information out there. I think it helps if not just one person or, like in our case, a group of people are talking about a single subject. I don't know if have you been on Twitter at all this weekend?
No,
Bill?
I haven't been on this weekend.
Yeah. Another archaeologist posted a Medium blog post about the drinking culture and stuff. And so then people have also been referencing back to your posts from has it been a while since you put those out? I feel like they were kind of fresh, but maybe it's just because the topic is always so fresh.
Yeah,
about
every
alcoholism
weekend.
and
I was going to say every
archaeology.
weekend somebody realizes that they shouldn't have drank that much, and then they realize. Anyway, no, yeah, I did write that, and we talked about it a little bit, but the impetus was the idea that there were some archaeologists that didn't drink, which then made me think about my own life and, how come I'm mixing the archaeology conferences and, hanging out with archaeologists with drinking. So, it was just kind of an iterative process that then also became investigative. But then I was interviewed by, I think, Science Magazine, or there was actually a magazine that interviewed me about how much archaeologists are drinking, because the reporter went to go learn about some archaeology. And then it was, they went to the bar and saw college grade drinking among professionals and was kind of like, what is this? This is the real story. Forget about what I was going to learn before. I'll have to check Twitter though and see what's going on. But yeah, I covered that quite a bit, and trying to create spaces for folks who don't drink alcohol to still be part of archaeology. And it isn't easy. It's crazy how hard it actually is.
Yeah, well, it was interesting watching it, because it was seeing like half the people responding like this is the first time they'd ever heard anyone discuss alcohol and archaeology, and then the other half of the people being like, yeah, there's this guy Bill White, you should really check out his work, blah blah blah. But I do think that was sort of, I guess the original point I was going with that is it'd be good to have more people talking about these subjects than I guess just us, because we have our network and we get the word out, but definitely don't reach everyone. And I'm pretty sure if other people were talking about it, there's different networks, and I don't know. I think I'd feel like more discussions would happen and things maybe change a little bit more or a little quicker. Though I could be just overly optimistic about that.
Well, I do think that we are changing things, because there's stuff that we kind of started off talking about that are now actually real things. The idea of, training or whatever for archaeologists, that was always kind of in the background, rolling around or something like that. And then now this is part of the discussion matter for the American Cultural Resources Association. I don't know if they constantly do this or whatever, but I do know that in the intro, they were talking about the blog posts and talking about the podcast and everything when they introduced me. And many of the people in the audience had actually listened to it. So, it is actually getting information out. And, we've talked, so it's crazy that sometimes the stuff that we end up talking about many different times, finally you end up seeing that, right? Like we had talked many different times about inequality in the field with regard to sexism and stuff like that. And then the SAA thing brings it all to the fore. But, we were 4 years in advance talking about gender discrimination. And, we had women, parents, mothers on the thing, on the podcast talking about, some of the stuff they've faced as women and mothers working in the field. And so sometimes it's like we're like telling the future, but I do feel like that's because we're just talking about the conversations that other archaeologists are having, but then recording them on the podcast. So as far as the future of archaeology, recording more of this stuff on podcasts, blogs, vlogs, and other stuff, I mean, that's the next wave, because we've already had 50 years of stuff go by, and the previous generations had these same conversations, and none of them were recorded. And probably 2% of it became some kind of journal article, and the rest of it just vanished. If you weren't at the conversation, you never got to hear about it. But what we're doing here is kind of not really archiving it, but recording it and making it available to a wider group of individuals. And so you can kind of see in many ways, this is the way things are going. Things go to social media, things go to, blogs or online magazines and stuff really quick. And then a long time later, it's in a journal article or something like that.
Yeah, well, I think that's probably going to be a good place to stop this episode of the CRM podcast. Bill, thank you so much for sharing all your thoughts about what you were discussing at ACRA. It's always interesting to hear what's going on at the upper echelons, I guess I could say, of CRM in the States, and seeing what people are thinking and what the general discussions are, at least happening in that conference, about training and bridging the gap between CRM and academia.
That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.arcpodnet.com/CRMArcPodcast. Please comment and share anywhere you see the show. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website, or just email chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Support the show and the network at arcpodnet.com/members. Get some swag and extra content while you're there. Send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about.
Thank you, listeners, for listening, and we'll see you in the field.
I guess I'm the late one. Bye-bye.
Is this... I was going to say, is this a game of bye chicken there, Bill?
Bye.
Oh, man, you almost had me there, but bye.
This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.